we are laying the background to Obafemi Awolowo's role in the Nigerian Civil War.
Hello, everybody. Once again, this is Fred Gwankwo coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Island TV. And as usual, I like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, depending on where you are around the world. As the title says, you see that this episode is going to be about a man I respect a lot, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and his role in the Civil War. Much of the narrative is going to be based on a third-party interview that was excellently done by Edmond Obilo. That's the way he pronounced his name. And that's going to be 90% of what you watch. I edited it to bring you just the beef of the interview with Dr. Yemi Farombi. But before I go into that, let me touch on my last episode where I talked about Yoruba bigots and their lies. In that episode, I talked about two critical things. One is a quote-unquote Igbo lady in Canada who made statements I would like to dissociate myself from because I don't support what she said. And the other one is a similar audio by an Edo group that was similarly saying what they are going to do with Igbos, something similarly shameful. In the initial reaction to both audio messages, I dissociated myself from that lady in Canada and what she said, but I clearly stated that she was reacting to the bigotry that's been going on against Igbos. Doesn't make what she said right. And I also played the Edo group audio to show what the lady was reacting to. But when you followed Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Bayo Ononuga and Dele Alake and their antecedents through the years, you also start to wonder if that lady is actually authentic, if she's an Igbo lady, or if she's somebody that they Bayo Ononuga and Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Dele Alake and their conniving styles used as a bait to say, here's what Igbo people are saying, when the lady is actually not Igbo. And on the Edo audio that was similarly distasteful, you also start to wonder, is that Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Bayo Ononuga and Dele Alake's ploy to knock Igbo heads and Edo heads together? Because in reality, except for isolated cases, I don't see any concerted issue between Igbos and Edo people. And one of the ladies I used frequently, and I used her in that last episode to illustrate some of the things I was talking about, was Aisha Yesufu, who also commented on the same topic, but made it clear that she's Edo and she's dissociating herself from that audio. So that's food for thought. Because if you want to follow what I'm saying about the conniving nature of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Bayo Onanuga, and Dele Alake, and how they cook up things, and this has been going on, they inherited it. This cooking up things against Igbos have been going on since the end of the Civil War, or even since just before the Civil War when the pogrom happened. And that's why this episode is very important, because you're going to hear from a Yoruba journalist and historian and elder talking about the different roles that different people played, including Awolowo leading up to that Civil War. And if you remember, leading up to the elections, Bola Ahmed Tinubu seemed very frail and very sick. And after the election, miraculously, he recovered. Just to buttress my case, that's how he suckered the Fulani North into supporting him, because the idiots supported him thinking that he's very sick, he's gonna die, and the terrorist Shetima is gonna become president. You do your research. With that said, let's go into this episode. It's talking about Awolowo's Chief Obafemi Awolowo and his role in the Civil War. I think this is a masterpiece. It's very long. You don't want to miss a second of it. And this confirms why Ojukwu referred to Chief Obafemi Awolowo as the president Nigeria never had.
And my guest is the author of the book Controversy Within the Dynamics of Office Politics. My guest is Dr. Yemi Farombi. He read geography at the University of Nigeria and Obafemi Awolowo University, then University of Ife. He did his master's degree in public administration at the University of Ife, where he was the first winner of the Peter Odumosu Prize for the best student in the MPA examinations. He is a member of the Nigerian Institute of Management, Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria, and Society of Nigerian Broadcasters. My guest is a renowned broadcaster. Yemi Farombi was General Manager NTV Ibadan, NTV Akure, now NTA Akure, and he later became Chairman Directorate of Information, Oyo State. Dr. Yemi Farombi would become Chairman Broadcasting Corporation of Oyo State, Chairman Daily Times of Nigeria, and Chairman Osun State Broadcasting Corporation. During the presidency of Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, Yemi Farombi became Nigeria's ambassador to the Philippines and Cambodia. We are discussing politics. Yemi Farombi is a politician grounded in the politics of the Nigerian state. Obafemi Awolowo, former premier of the western region of Nigeria, was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment with hard labor on the 11th of September 1963. Before sentencing him, Justice George Sodende Shuemimo of the Lagos High Court listened as Awolowo made a statement. Awolowo, in his statement in court, says he welcomed any sentence that may be imposed upon him, but that his only concern is not for himself, but that his imprisonment might do harm to Nigeria. Did his imprisonment do harm to Nigeria, Dr. Farombi?
Well, yes, to the extent that we lost the opportunity to utilize his knowledge, his wisdom, even as leader of opposition. And I would think, and I can say this very boldly, the story of Nigeria would have been different if they had not imprisoned him. I would like to recall what Tony Nahuru said in the hallowed chambers of the House of Representatives, that we are embarking on a journey, the start of which we know, the end of which we don't know. We are still on that journey. If Awolowo had not been sentenced, perhaps there would not have been the rigging of the elections of 1964. Perhaps there would have been no disagreement between NCNC and MPC in 1964. Perhaps Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, as ceremonial president, would not have been unwilling to invite Tafawa Balewa to set up the government. Perhaps there will have been no massive rigging, no need for the massive rigging of the 1965 elections in the West. Perhaps if we didn't have that massive rigging, there will have been no Operation Wettier. The large-scale destruction, killing of people. Perhaps if all of that had not happened, nothing would have affected the conscience of Nzogwu and his colleagues. Perhaps there would have been no military intervention. If there had been no military intervention and subsequent reaction by the North on May 29 in the name of Araba, and the counter coup, or the second coup, how will I call it, the return march of July 29, perhaps there will have been no massive killing of the Easterners and the North. Perhaps we would have had no civil war. The story of Nigeria would have been different.
So he was right.
Absolutely.
He was released from prison on the 3rd of August, 1966, about 4 days after the counter coup. Some said Ojukwu released him. Others say it was the Gowon federal government who released him from Calabar prison.
Officially, it was the federal government. But as at that time, given the unease in Nigeria, the regional governor for East had physical possession of Awolowo. He was in Calabar prison. The states had not been created. If he was unwilling, it would have been possible to release Awolowo. Because at that time, Ojukwu didn't recognize the leadership of Gowon. And this is why you have to look at the events. Now, we are privileged. We are looking at so many years after and interpret it correctly. It was obvious, and it's, at least to me, that it's perhaps true that those who engineered the first coup really wanted to install Awolowo.
You think so? That Nzogwu and Coup wanted to install Awolowo?
I think so.
What gives you that impression?
Because they felt that the government was guilty of 10%, was giving up nepotism, was guilty of too many things, and there were indications, particularly if you read the books of those who survived, that part of their determination was that to correct events in Nigeria, they needed a radical leadership.
And Awolowo was the man?
They thought, at least, of all of them, he was the most radical. So they obviously wanted to install him. And I have a feeling that perhaps Ojukwu subscribed to that, because he could have physically made it impossible to remove Awolowo. He could have moved Awolowo from Calabar prison to another prison where it would have been possible to release him. After they had to send a plane to go and bring him. So if he was not willing, so I will put it this way: the federal government under Gowon needed, of course, the release of Awolowo for political legitimacy. And I am told, I don't have the evidence now, that there was an attempt, in fact, in the dying days of Ironsi, there was perhaps a conclusion to release him. Because I understand that Fajuyi, who was the governor then, had been making a preparation to receive him. And Ojukwu was important, was significant in Ironsi's government. So it would be difficult not to credit him with anything in that release. So I believe released by Gowon and with the support of Ojukwu.
One of the books I'm recommending for this class is Why We Struck, the story of the first Nigerian coup. Why We Struck, written by Adewale Ademoyiga. Read this book. Read this book for a clearer understanding of why Nzogwu and Coup struck on the 15th of January, 1966. You would find this book on udarabooks.com. And there are WhatsApp numbers pinned to this post. You can get the books on those WhatsApp numbers. So you can always request for this title, Why We Struck. We are discussing Obafemi Awolowo and the Civil War. General Yakubu Gowon was on ground to receive Awolowo at Ikeja Cantonment when his plane landed in Lagos after he was released from Calabar prison. Why did he accord Awolowo that honor?
Political calculation. Gowon was operating a fragile government as at that time. He just taken over, not because he was the leader of the coup, but because he appeared to be the only acceptable person.
Who was the leader of the coup?
General Murtala Mohammed.
The hot-headed Murtala Mohammed.
Yes. And really wanted to pull out the North from Nigeria until the American ambassador and the UK High Commissioner intercepted. So Gowon need to build a support. We had 4 regions: the North, the East, the Midwest, and the West. As at that time, it was only the Midwest that Gowon could really talk about as being Nigerian. The East, given what has happened in the return match, had lost confidence in Nigeria. The North started from wanting to pull out of Nigeria. they were advised not to. The West didn't belong. And they needed the West. So political calculation, political legitimacy, get Awolowo to support you. Perhaps then you be able to have 3 regions against 1. I don't believe it's any love.
On the 11th of August 1966, there was a meeting of Yoruba leaders of thought, and it was convened by the governor of the Western region, Colonel Adeyinka Adebayo. The purpose was to rally the Yoruba nation to adopt a common position in the planned national constitutional discourse. Can we look at that meeting?
Yes, we can. Governor said there will be an ad hoc constitutional conference. I mean, of course, the very basis of Nigeria had been shaken. If we quote from Gowon's speech himself, because he did say the basis of unity was threatened and perhaps no longer there. So we needed a new constitution. And there are 4 regions. So the West need to articulate its own position. Don't forget that Awolowo had been marginalized to irrelevance, as it were. He's been in prison for years, and his opponents are taking over. But the opponents were not in charge of the people. That's why there was large-scale Operation Wet here. So there was need to make the oppressors of Awolowo either to accept his leadership and for Chief Awolowo to be willing to accommodate them. So there was need, because the mind of the majority of the people, the minds were with Awolowo, not with them. So they had this meeting to adopt the Western region's position on which way Nigeria. And it turned out not to be not what Awolowo thought. He had come out as usual with his paper, philosophical, the reason for a federation, the basis for a federation, and the kind of federation we must have, the number of units we could have, and all of that. But a lot of people were more anxious supposed to get is forgiveness. And to get perhaps his recognition. So the very first thing they moved in the meeting was that he should become their leader. And the motion was moved by those who had spent the last 5-6 years destroying whatever had been his political empire. And he refused.
He refused. Now, before we go further, Professor Onobamiro testified against him before he was sent to prison.
Yeah.
Why did he do that?
I would think that it's also for political convenience.
Because Onobamiro was one of the intellectuals in Awo's time.
Yes, he was an intellectual. He was a minister of education, but was not particularly ideologically positioned in the center. Yes, he was Minister of Education implementing free education. The conception of free education belonged to Alayonde and Ajasi, who are not professors anyway, but who were political ideologues, who looked at welfare of people, who looked at the number 2 item they agreed on in 1951 was to fight for freedom from ignorance. Ignorance and diseases. That was their number 2. Is that freedom from ignorance that translated to free education? From disease translated to free health? He was not there then.
So at the meeting of the leaders of thought, they wanted Awolowo's forgiveness. By this time, Ojukwu in the eastern region had refused to recognize the authority of Gowon. Ojukwu seized federal assets in the east and confiscated federal revenue. He detained a civilian Nigerian airway flight that landed in Enugu. He refused to attend meetings of the Supreme Military Council. It was clear Nigeria was headed for a civil war. Did Awolowo react appropriately to Ojukwu's actions?
I think what he did, I'll put it in 2 ways. There were his thoughts and there were his actions. And I think the first was, of course, the West was in a very weak position. All the troops in the West were largely from the North. So all the barracks and military cantonments in the Southwest were peopled and officered by Northerners. Before the July event, perhaps there were some Easterners there that were in Abeokuta. Some of them in Ibadan. But when the return march happened, for their own safety, they ran. So the leadership of the army, Nigerian army in the West, were the arms of the Northerners.
Were all the Igbos in Abeokuta, did they run away or some of them were also massacred?
Absolutely massacred. And the remaining had to run. They didn't run away, they ran in the interest of their life.
Why were they taken unawares? Okay, I keep thinking, they've dubbed the first coup an Igbo coup. And
the first one was never an Igbo coup.
It was not an Igbo coup?
It was a Nigerian coup.
Can you explain?
It's Ademoye, a Yoruba man. Is he an Igbo?
The author of this book?
Yes. Very, very intellectual.
It was not an Igbo coup?
It wasn't an Igbo coup. It was a coup of genuine Nigerians who were worried about Nigeria. Yes, they were young, generational. It was the generation that brought them together. It was their willingness to risk their life, to have a better Nigeria that brought them together. It wasn't to put an Igbo man or create an Igbo empire. No. Nzogwu himself is Midwest Igbo. No? In normal parlance, he is not an original Igbo. So he wasn't doing all of that.
Ifajuna was Igbo.
Yeah, was Igbo.
Onwatuegu Igbo.
Yes.
Most of the officers were Igbo officers.
What joined them together was intellect, intellectual revolt. We wanted better Nigeria. Most of them were educated. They were university graduates.
Most of the army officers, senior army officers killed were from the north. The premier of the western region was killed. The premier of the northern region was killed. Michael Okpara was not killed.
That was a failure of individual operators.
Tell me more.
In planning the coup, they broke Nigeria into territories, and each person had roles he had to play. Nzogwu was in charge of the north. When he moved, he sought even the support of Ojukwu, who never gave him support.
But Ojukwu knew about the coup?
Not before. He was not party to the planning of the coup, from everything I've read. But of course, for you to take over government, don't forget Nzogwu was just a training officer. And he was using trainees. And Ojukwu was the commander in Kano. So he needed him. He reached out to him and he didn't give him support. So if it was an original Igbo coup, of course, Ojukwu would give him support and he would have taken over. Because they have the largest collection of military in the north. But he didn't. In the west, of course, it's succeeded because the environment was against Akintola himself. So it was easy. And of course, because he reacted in a different way, he decided to fight. He decided to shoot. No other person did that. He was the only one. And of course,
when you say he decided to shoot, how?
When they captured his deputy. The military boys can be something else. They captured his deputy. So it was the deputy that led them to his house. It was he who spoke to him. He didn't know the military was. There would be a military movement. When he now discovered that Fanikaude had military boys waiting, he also had prepared for such days, not of military, but of civilian. He thought the operation where people would probably come to his house one day. So he took his submachine gun and opened fire.
You know, mind you, he had been warned of a coup.
Yes, which was why a day before the coup, he flew to the north to discuss it with Sardauna, and Sardauna said it was impossible.
It was impossible.
Because he was sure of the Northern Command. And he was sure of the loyalty of Ironsi. And Ironsi had no reason not to be loyal to them. It was not to be the GOC. It was not recommended by the military. The outgoing General Everard or what? Never recommended him.
Did he recommend Babafemi Ogundipe?
He didn't either. I think he recommended Malamari. But Balewa and Sardauna opted for Ironsi. They said, let's keep seniority. So why would Ironsi want to fight them? No reason. Absolutely none. So he had no reason to be part of conspiracy.
They didn't see Nzogwu coming.
Nobody. And that's what happens to politicians.
But there was movement of troops in Kaduna. It was clear.
It was just for training. And he does that regularly. Even from evidences, those troops didn't know what they were doing until they got to points of action. They thought Nzogwu would carry them, he would train them, but he was a revolutionary. And they are always in the midst of decadence, some revolutionary. In the midst of darkness, there will be one source of light.
Wasn't he too brutal? Wasn't he too brutal? The way Ahmadu Bello was murdered.
When you look at it today, you would think so. But that time, a failure at that point was the end. And you know, he's a military man, a young man, well trained. He went to Sandhurst. Sandhurst was the best training center in the British Commonwealth. He knew that if he failed, he's death. So it's either you die or you kill. And he knew if he was unable to penetrate the Sardauna hegemony, that was the end of the coup. And he believed that the feudalism they were talking about, you know, any Marxist, and there are many in the South there, any radical, you criticize the feudalism in the North. And he was seen as the epitome, was the Sardauna, next in rank to the Sultan. So he wasn't just a premier, he also had religious control. So for him not to pay, you don't operate like, how would I call it, a shooter. You do what you call a spray shooting. I must kill this one, because if I don't, that will be the end of the exercise. And he was the leader. So he assigned to himself the most difficult assignment. So if he failed, everything.
The guys in
but
the east.
looking backward now, it will look brutal.
Because he took Ahmadu Bello's wife along.
They took Sodende's wife along too.
The guys in the east did not execute theirs.
Now let us look at the truth of the circumstances. They just had a Commonwealth meeting in Lagos. And all of them have been going away. And most of them were aware there would be a coup, because they had better intelligence through their embassies. But we still had Archbishop Macarius around, who was visiting the East, as at the day of the action. You have to look at the international dimension to it. You attack Okpara with Macarius. So that was a possibility. I'm doing my own analysis now.
Yes.
And in this matter, we have to be objective analysts. Will he kill Archbishop Macarius alone? So he had to stay hand for Macarius to leave. But Coup had already started. And because it was Ifeanyi that had responsibility for that, a lot of people now interpret it. And they may be right. But from the way I look at the international dimension to it, it may just be, let's wait until Macarius will leave. Action had happened in the north. It had happened in the west. There was no need for the Midwest, because there was a new state, a new region, and there was no environmental hostility to the incumbent government the way it was. And Dennis Osadebe, who was there, in the political calculation, was not a significant element. So it is possible that sheer incompetence of Ifeanyi or ethnic sentiment or international political sentiment, either of those three could have interfered with him.
But was there any reason to take out Okpara? The environment was friendly to Okpara at the time.
Actually, I don't believe it could have been part of the original plan. I wasn't part of it. I'm able to read it. If those coup planners thought that the man to lead Nigeria was Awolowo, and his political partner is Okpara, why would they want to kill him? Let's look at it objectively. Part of the causes of the coup was the 1964 federal election. Action Group, SNC formed OPGA. In the absence of Awolowo, they had a joint leadership, as it were. Okpara and the wife of Awolowo. And they campaigned together all over Nigeria. So when you look at it analytically, it will be strange if people thought that this rubbish, and they thought this rubbish was based on feudalism. There's no feudalism in this. They thought there were partners and collaborators with feudalists in the West. They eliminated them. They thought there were also collaborators in Lagos. That had to do with Okutiebo, Balewa. They eliminated them. So what would be the reason? for dealing with the co-leader of what they saw as the only hope for Nigeria.
Azikiwe left the country before the coup.
If Azikiwe had been in the country, they will eliminate him.
You think so?
I believe so.
We are talking about Awolowo in the Nigerian Civil War. And when you talk about the war, one name that must come up is Ojukwu. So look at this book, Emeka, written by Frederick Forsyth. Emeka is a classical work if you want to know more about Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. You can get this book on udarabooks.com. I am discussing with Dr. Yemi Farombi, looking at the background to the war, and the focus is on Obafemi Awolowo. We have talked about the August 11th, 1966 meeting of Yoruba leaders of thought, convened by the governor of the Western region, Colonel Adeyinka Adebayo. Dr. Farombi says it was a meeting to rally the Yoruba nation to adopt a common position in the planned national constitutional discourse. But the meeting turned out to be an appeal for Awolowo to lead the Yoruba nation. It turned out to be a meeting where those that offended Awolowo came to ask for forgiveness. There was another meeting of Yoruba leaders of thought in Ibadan on the 1st of May, 1967. In that meeting, Obafemi Awolowo was elected by acclamation as the leader of the Yoruba people.
Yes, after Colonel Robert Adeyinka Adebayo came to the meeting to appeal to him, he made a speech, passionate speech. If your colleagues say you should lead them, accept to lead them. Of course, Adebayo himself didn't belong to the Awolowo school. It was Pajuyi who shared Awolowo's political philosophy. So he was one of those who needed accommodation by Awolowo. And of course, he had this problem also with the farmers.
Agbekoya.
And it only required the intervention of Awolowo to stop it. In any case, and Awolowo said clearly, I will accept, but that as soon as political parties are allowed to emerge, I will stop being the leader of the Yorubas, because I don't expect all the Yorubas to be in my political party. And that was why in the latter days in his life, you never really made reference to him as leader of the Yorubas. You talked more about his president of UPN, leader of the UPN. From 1977 or 78, he really didn't see himself again as the leader of the Yorubas.
But today, has any man in the history of Yoruba nation assumed the status of Obafemi Awolowo?
The truth is that before him, Yoruba had no leader. And after him, we've not had one like that. I think he's the kind of person that you see one of them in 1 century or so. As a matter of fact, what had given Yoruba solidarity, the solidity they have today, is the quality of mind and action of Awolowo. Nobody ever governed the Yoruba together as one. Nobody. Not even in the days of Oyo Empire. All the Yorubas were never governed as one political unit.
Awolowo was able to bring the nation together.
And he did so well. So everybody became so proud to identify with him.
On the 1st of May 1967, Awolowo delivered a speech at that meeting. And That speech today is referred to as the Four Imperatives by some.
Yeah.
He makes the point that only a peaceful solution must be found to arrest the worsening stalemate in Nigeria at that time. Another imperative is that the eastern region must be encouraged to remain part
of Nigeria. Yeah.
And the third imperative is that if the eastern region is allowed by acts of omission or commission to secede from or opt out of Nigeria, then the western region and Lagos must also stay out of the federation. He made that point.
Yeah.
Why did he make that statement? What does that statement mean?
Very clear. You cannot have a Nigeria that is only the north and the west. That's the point he's making. If you're going to have a Nigeria, it's either to be of all of us or no Nigeria. And of course, he had the problem on hand, the northern troops. Either in that speech or in a subsequent speech, he said the northern troops must be withdrawn so that the Westerners can have also the freedom to take their own decision. And it was clear to him, if you force the East out, or you allow them to go, then the West must be allowed to go or must be deemed as having been forced out. That you're not going to have a situation, you will have a dominant North. And he has just come from prison, having tasted out of the, the bitter pill that northern leadership or oligarchy can inflict. We're not going to allow that to continue.
He makes the statement, any war by the North against the East on any account whatsoever would be an unholy crusade for which it won't be unjustifiable to shed a pint of blood. Awolowo had also said that any war against the East would be illegitimate unless it had the backing of the West and the Midwest.
So what he's saying is that if the North, as northern region, decided to wage a war on eastern Nigeria, they are on their own. But of course, they fought a war ostensibly by Nigeria against Biafra. So even though the commanders at that time that started the war, that was Mohammed Shua, 1st Division, that entered via Nzogwu. The 2nd Division was General Murtala Muhammad. They didn't even have a 3rd Division until we had problem in the Midwest. So they themselves didn't trust any other person, but was dead ostensibly in the name of Nigeria. It was Federal Republic of Nigeria now fighting a war against Biafra. Whereas if they had chosen to fight as northern Nigeria, I'm sure even the Midwest that passionately believed in Nigeria would have folded their hands.
You made mention of Awolowo demanding for the withdrawal of mostly northern troops from the western region. Awolowo pulled out of the ad hoc committee, insisting that Gowon pulled out northern troops in the 3rd Battalion stationed in Ibadan. Awo saw it as an occupation troop. Quoting him, "We have neither military might nor the overwhelming advantage of numbers here in western Nigeria and Lagos, but we have the justice of a noble and imperishable cause on our side." Can I say that Awolowo instigated the North to launch the war, knowing that the North will not want to lose the Yoruba state?
No, because he was not part of the government.
He was influential.
No.
He was the most prominent civilian at that time. Nnazi Azikiwe was keeping a low profile.
No, in fact, he wasn't available. There was Anthony Nahoro who had emerged as a formidable force. But like I said, the circumstances of the Midway dictated that the many ethnic nations there should support in Nigeria. The Yorubas could afford if they had their own military might. And that's why when I go back to 1962 and they said they wanted to stage a coup, people didn't even have local government police. Not to talk of a battalion.
It was that bad.
Not that bad.
Perhaps the reason Babafemi Ogundipe was easily intimidated.
Absolutely. When he gave an instruction and the officer, not the officer, the constable said, I will check with my captain. When a brigadier general gives an instruction, and the corporal says, I will check with my captain, of course, you are not in charge.
That's mutiny.
Well, he could do nothing because he himself was surrounded. It was that preponderance that made it easy for them to overrun Ironsi and Faju in Ibadan now. They were surrounded by troops that were ethnically biased and were ethnically indoctrinated to see themselves as born to rule. Some of them might be regretting it now, like General Danjuma. When they look back at the role they played, the likes of General Lekwot, all of them, they are middle belters.
They were not Fulanis. And they were Christians.
They were Christians, but didn't see it. They saw the omnibus north that they were defending. The Shagayas, the Lekwots, there's this town now in Plateau that had so many generals. They saw themselves as northern elites.
Are you talking about Lantang generals?
The Lantang generals. They saw themselves as northern elites. Events proved to them later that yeah, there is enough, and there is enough. But later they began to see themselves as middlebelt. They thought the likes of Joseph Tucker and his fellow travelers were idiots. They were lunatic to be fighting against the North, which they had. Yes, they controlled the fighting men, but they were not the officers. And they were being used. And they allowed themselves to be used because they were not politically alert. It took at least 2 decades for the Middle Belt to realize. Awolowo saw this. When they formed the UNBC, Awolowo supported them. When they formed, when Kashim Ibrahim, who must be the grandfather of Kashim Imam, they supported the Asher Group. Asher Group was the leader, was the opposition in the North, in alliance with UNBC. They posted Ige, posted him in Jos. He was the lawyer to plead the case of the Middle Belter. But the Middle Belter didn't see the problem of their own. It is after the war, they were now beginning to see that yes, we are one North. But like they said in animal farms, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Now I'm sure they regret the role they played.
Why do you think they are regretting the role they played?
when you listen to that, you must speak these days, in the last 10 years. So they now realize that what they thought was the monolithic North at that time was really that their numbers was being used by some elite to dominate Nigeria.
Omotayo Oluwarotimi Onobamiro says that Awolowo approached him. He told my father he would like him to recruit officers for him from the army because he was a gifted man, that he was brainy. My father went to buy some books on all the coups that had taken place in the world. He read the books and he went back to tell the two the coup could not succeed. I think this must be Onobamiro's son.
Yes, I had always heard that view. Yeah.
Okay.
I've read, I would have loved that Professor Onobamiro wrote. He's his father, so.
Why did he not write his own story? The son says Awolowo told him to go and bring the books on coups and coup planning. Later he called my father to say he was no longer plotting the coup. We are discussing Obafemi Awolowo and the Civil War. Dr. Farombi, I want us to round off on this note. Awo was elected chairman of the National Conciliation Committee. In this position, he led a powerful delegation to Enugu on the 6th of May, 1967, to meet Ojukwu to persuade him not to go to war. Let's look at that meeting between Awo and Ojukwu.
I think it was a very significant moment in the history of Nigeria, where you begin to think of whether there will be war or there will be none. Well, I don't have the record, but I have Bola Ije's passed that story with me because he was there.
He was in that meeting.
I was there as one of the aides of Awolowo. I think that meeting couldn't have succeeded. Looking at it now, benefit of hindsight, because this was far too gone.
Far too gone.
Yeah. And what were they far too gone? They were seen every day truckloads, not of property, but of dead bodies. It was a daily occurrence. I have friends who told me this story later, who are my classmates at the University of Nigeria. When you want to forget this, what has happened, then they bring another dead person. Young, vibrant people who had hope yesterday, who have been destroyed, who have been killed, who have been slaughtered for what they didn't know about.
It was a pogrom?
Real pogrom.
So, do we still have people who say that the coup was an Igbo coup? And all those lies you've been telling about Igbos, what did you learn from this video? Is there anything about the guy doing the interview that was not authentic? There are questions there he had about Igbos and their intentions. And an Igbo person did not clarify those his hard questions. A Yoruba man clarified it and cleared any suspicion that could be related to Igbos doing anything to Nigeria. Yet, you, the bigots of Nigeria, the bigots of Lagos, some of our friends who we party with in Lagos, in Abuja, in Washington, D.C., in Chicago, in LA, in Detroit, some friends of yours that act like they're very open-minded friends are just as bigoted as those bigots that killed Igbos and anybody who looked like Igbo in Lagos at the last election. Now, I'm sure a lot of people tend to feel like, why does Fred keep bringing this thing up? I keep bringing it up because Igbos say that na arụrụ na gbafọ ghọrọ omenala. When a bad thing goes on for a year, it becomes tradition. The lies, the damaging lies that the likes of Bayo Ononuga, Dele Alake, Bola Ahmed Tinubu have instigated against Igbos did not start with Bayo Ononuga and Dele Alake and Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It started way before them. It started just before the pogrom, continued intensively at the end of the Civil War. There was no social media. The Western Nigeria controlled the press in Nigeria. For some reason, the bigots in Western Nigeria found Igbos to be a threat to whatever their interest is in Nigeria. And the Fulani cabal in the north found this Western Nigeria cabal that spent a lot of time in the media they controlled, distorting news about Igbos. The Fulanis found them a convenient ally. And these are two groups that if you take the Igbos out of the equation, they'll be killing themselves. And if Nigeria is not put under control today, it's not going to be far before you start seeing Yorubas and Fulanis killing themselves, because there is nothing that brings them together. So the reason I keep hounding on this point is that it took so long to damage the reputation of Igbos in Nigeria. It's going to take as much intensity on my little part, hoping that the mainstream media will also get into it. But all you people watching me, sharing these things and adding your own 2 cents to it with facts, not fake news, not making up stories. Bring out facts like I brought out in this interview today. And I love when these interviews are with respectable, progressive, open-minded Yorubas. So you're not going to say it's Fred Nwankwo distorting the news or it's an Igbo man and all. This is why I bring these things to you guys. And one last thing is, when I bring these things to you, what's so hard about clicking share? What's so hard about clicking subscribe? What's so hard about clicking on like? That's how channels grow. And on that note, I want to say thank you to you, because the last episode is heading for 15,000. Yeah, for the people who do 100,000 and more, it's not a big deal. But when I do 10,000, 15,000, I'm very happy, because most of the times I'm hovering around 2,000. And this show, Bold Talk on Island TV, should be doing 100,000 views. The only way you can do that is you. And I'm counting on you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is Fred Nwankwo coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Island TV. And as always, good night and God bless.
Onye mazolo bio akwa nwa zoro bio Max ibia bunye go kwanu mo no fube nazo ulaga ni biazugo mmanwu ulaga do ni biazugo akwa nwa iloji o biko rapuzo kona bazia
Nero mi kechofo ama kwa mnika gogodia waligwe kwelo ikejo babele bege hey you want Odogo kenero mi kechofo kwa mnika gogodia waligwe kwelo ikejo babele bege hey you want Eku kampune kene omogo ndi nso Chukwu negaje esi nwanne m ekene dị ịlapụlụ ife niile na-eme wee bịa nke gosili na anyị na gị bụ nwanne wisdom ga-adị ka nye gị maịkị ka ogobanya bụ egwu isili mmaksi ọ bụ na-etiri egwu a malụkwa malụ n'imego m ife ọjọọ wee sị gị nwanne m ife ọbụ na ịchọlụ na ngeme wisdom onume ekene gị gbamanwe iyo iyo biko lapụ nabasị ya
Zoro 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 Duru joy na bugwa osa Sokoto ujembe nwilo anu solo nwe manofia nara onye